So what happens is if you make some people in the community distrust a source, what happens is the same evidence, the people that distrust the source will reject that evidence and they'll believe the opposite of what that evidence suggests. And then the other group goes the other way. And so this creates a problem because the groups that are converging on the wrong belief, they because of their trust relations, they will reject the evidence that will help change their belief. Not only that, but that evidence pushes them even further in the wrong direction.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking with a philosopher who's also a judo guy, who's also a wrestler, who's also heavily involved in the, the research around conspiracy theories and trying to promote, the fight against science denialism. That's a double negative or something. So I bring to you, or I present for you, Ami Palmer, who's currently adjunct professor of philosophy at Ohio Northern University. And you're originally from where I'm living. You're originally from Vancouver, BC. So
that's right.
Hello, remotely. So did you start wrestling in BC?
Yeah, I wrestled through high school with Johnny Bono. He's got a pretty famous program for those of you from that area that would know. He's won the national championship several times with the team, and basically, since he's been coaching almost every year, won the provincial championships.
Okay.
So I was his first student. So I wear that with pride because that the team turned into a real dominating team.
I guess it helps explain why your website, or one of the websites of yours that I've seen, Wrestling with Philosophy, has got a picture of two Greek guys, a Greek statue of two Greek guys wrestling, and one of them's there with a 2-on-1 wrist grip. So that what is like wrestling and philosophy have? Because there is a history there.
Yeah, I love that question, and for me, there are many deep similarities between philosophy and wrestling. Well, first of all, for the ancient Greeks, wrestling was an integral part of what was considered a standard education for a young man. And Plato himself was a famous wrestler. And the thought was that the goal of life is moral and character development. And when you're dealing with moral and character type issues, these are abstract concepts, like what is virtue and what does it mean to be courageous? And it's very hard to grapple with. And so the idea is that there's this system of stages for education where with the physical, we're talking about tangible things, and we can understand what it means to grapple with something and how to problem solve with concrete body positions. And so that's like a preliminary stage for development, for being able to wrestle with philosophical questions that involve abstract problems. So it was really integral for education on the Greek view. The other relationship that I like to talk about is that both philosophers and wrestlers do the hardest work, but they get the least glory. And anyone who's wrestled knows that it is absolutely the most grueling sport, but nobody gives a damn about it, right? So the only way that you can actually wrestle is if you truly love the sport.
Yeah, it's not like there's a ton of money in it for you for winning an Olympic gold, but I mean, you win Olympic gold in the 100-meter, you're going to have shoe sponsorships for life. Singlet sponsorships don't pay as much.
Yeah, and you'll see, like, even in the US, you see they're starting to, there's been a trend in like closing down wrestling programs. It's not really a spectator sport, or doesn't have, at least in the US, doesn't have spectator appeal.
Maybe in Ohio, maybe in the Midwest where you are.
Yeah, it's changed a little bit, right? The last, I think, like since the streaming services, it's changed a little bit. I mean, also with the growth of BJJ and UFC. But, back in the, pre-2000s, like very few people followed wrestling, especially, in Canada or the US. So, I mean, really the only way you're going to invest that amount of time and commitment to something where you're just getting beat on all the time is if you just truly have a passion for it. And intellectually, I think that's the same for philosophy. Like, nobody gives a crap about what philosophers say in the public, really not that much. But, it is probably, one of the most difficult academic disciplines.
So before we dive into the philosophy part of it, let's just stick with the man hugging and how you turned from spandex wrestling into pajama wrestling, because you did study judo, and you currently run the judo program at your university, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So why did you go over to judo?
Yeah, so that was in large part because of so I lived in Japan for 5 years. In the early 2000s, before BJJ really took off, I was training with a friend of mine, Roy Duquette, Spartacus Gym, and he and I both were learning together. And we get these grainy videos off of YouTube and just kind of figure stuff out. And then so I wanted to pursue that. So I moved to Japan because I wanted to train, and I went and trained with Sanai Kikuta, who had won the Abu Dhabi championships at the time. And I found that, so anyway, I eventually ended up moving into a small fishing village, and the only outlet for my grappling was judo. And it was a high school club. And I thought, I gotta go with high school students. These guys took me for a ride. They just mopped the floor with me. And so I really firsthand earned so much respect for judo. And just I was also in my athletic prime at the time, and these high school kids were throwing me. And just that feeling of being able to throw someone who's stronger than you, and I would just walk into it. I was I need to know how to do that. That's amazing. And the other thing was of all the other grappling disciplines of the people that I've trained with, the judo guys always have that right combination of toughness and technique.
Yeah. It's amazing how much, obviously wrestling is difficult, but the technical development in judo is just at another level. The amount of work that people have to put into developing, pick a judo throw, harai goshi, uchimata, the hundreds of thousands of reps that you will have done by the time you reach a high level of competition. I'm not sure there's an equivalent in, not to take anything away from wrestling, because those wrestlers have been beat on hundreds of thousands of times.
Yeah.
They might even be tougher. That's hard to quantify. But the level of technical development that you have to do in judo is just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I always, when I'm teaching the grappling portion of my class, I always say that, with wrestling, you can overcome physical deficiency with strength, right? So if you go in for a double and it's not technically perfect, if you're a strong athletic guy, you can finish the takedown. But that's not true of a judo throw. If you miss the timing or you don't get the kazushi just right, the throw's just not going to work. You can't force it.
What do you think it is? Why is that? Is it the gi? Is it the rule set? Is it is it something else?
I think just judo technique, just the mechanics of the techniques depend not so much on strength. They depend on timing and correct leverage. And when those elements aren't there, no amount of strength can really compensate. And I think it's also easier to defend against a throw than it is someone crashing in on your legs.
Yeah. It's too bad, because that was really my bread and butter. I mean, a double leg takedown is part of the judo gokyo, the original sacred techniques, or the approved list of techniques. And it was definitely what I gravitated to. Not that I was so much stronger than the people I ran into, but it was it was a fringe technique that they didn't have as much experience defending. So I pulled it off in competition. I'd pull it off at the club. And the day that they banned and essentially made it a disqualifiable offense to touch below the belt, I was okay, well, there goes any hope of me ever, I was never very competitive in judo, but all of my competitiviosity was thanks to to doing things that are illegal now.
Yeah, it's funny. So when I did judo in Japan, you could still go for the legs. And so I would use that. And my judo never really developed that much in Japan because the legs were open and I came from a wrestling background. So why wouldn't I just go for the legs? But then I picked up judo again about 10 years ago. And yeah, I couldn't, that was illegal. So it forced me to learn the throws.
It's almost like somebody who always goes back for leg locks being banned from going for a leg lock, so they have to develop passing the guard, despite themselves. So this judo and wrestling is actually not how I came to know of you. It was through your work attempting to address things like anti-vax conspiracies and conspiracy thinking in general. And of course, that's pretty rife right now in the jiu-jitsu community. I think there are some obvious explanations for it. I think the community as a whole does skew a little bit to the right. Mm-hmm. Not wildly, but it somewhat. And I think obviously during a pandemic when small businesses, especially small fitness businesses that rely on extremely close contact, they're just going to be hammered disproportionately, and there's a very strong financial incentive to find other narratives that say no, it's okay to train. I understand, I think, why this conspiracy thinking became rife within the community. Do you agree that those are the major ones, or is there an aspect that I haven't considered? Because I'm kind of baffled, and I know a bunch of people who love the sport are just baffled and like, what the hell happened to the sport and the community that I loved? Or that I love.
Yeah, this is actually a great topic for a paper, is like, why was the martial arts community so susceptible to this? Right. And I think like you're right to be suspicious of the single explanation. We can certainly count on motivated reasoning. But I think like we can also think about the type of person who's attracted to martial arts. Right. So I think that's one thing, is
the autonomous individual who perseveres through effort.
Yeah. Like where it's a sign of weakness to defer to someone else, to concede that you don't know everything. Right. Unless it's like your sensei about, a technique or something. So I think like that's part of it. And I think that still, even though BJJ kind of eliminated some of it, there's still an element of people who are attracted to like mysticism that are, disproportionately make up the martial arts community. Pre the supremacy of grappling, there was still like a whole lot of like chi type stuff, and the kind of person who would get attracted to it, like, genuinely bought into this kind of mystical type of thinking, and then if you just like eat the right supplements or something, and like kind of like an alt med type mentality, I think is disproportionately attracted to martial arts to begin with. That's part of it. The other part of it is, we'll talk more about this in a second, but with respect to the leaders of the community, so most people have heard about the Dunning-Kruger Effect.
Please go through it.
Yeah. So let me just first give like the mistaken understanding of the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which is it means that people who are stupid don't realize that they're stupid. Right. That's the mistaken understanding. What the Dunning-Kruger Effect actually shows, or as I understand it, is that people who are competent or have expertise in one area think that their competence and expertise transfers over into all areas. And also, people that defer to someone that they see as having expertise in one area will also defer to them in all other areas. And so we see this all over the internet, like these IDW guys, just generally all these internet gurus. They are talking about political philosophy. They're talking about immunology. They're talking about philosophy of law. They're talking about Supreme Court decisions. Like, you cannot, talking about martial arts, nobody is an expert in all those things, right? Yet these people feel as though somehow they have something to say on the matter that some of the experts missed, right? And this is the true Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that you don't, no matter how expert you are in one area, you don't know enough to be able to evaluate your own competence in other areas, right? And let me just put a caveat for the nerds out there. There's some dispute within the academic literature as to the strength of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Some people say that it hasn't been replicated or that it's been debunked. My understanding of the literature is that there are some subsets of cases where the Dunning-Kruger effect does show up. And so it may not be a universal effect, but I think it does show up in certain cases.
That's part of the whole replication crisis in the social sciences. See,
it has been replicated, right? It's one of the most widely replicated results, but there are instances where people have failed to replicate the effect. So there's some dispute. It's just like an academic debate, but I think the consensus view is that it shows up in some cases.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, because some of the worst medical advice I've ever received has been from martial artists, who you'd think there'd be some kind of overlap there, given that they're injuring themselves all the time and dealing with injuries and have injured students, and they're kind of in the business of taking people apart, that the ability to put people back together would be semi-related. It's kind of, if you're good at golf, maybe you have something to offer to polo players. You're hitting a ball with a stick. But no, like the really, really good martial artists have given me horrendous medical advice. I would literally be dead. Right? I was encouraged to not. I was dying of polycystic kidney disease about 6 years ago. My kidney function ended up going down to like 12%. I was just walking around in a coma, and just a few months before, somebody had encouraged me to not have a transplant and just take these herbs and do this type of meditation. And the guy was he was a really, really, really high level Taekwondo coach. One, being an expert in Taekwondo in no way entitles you to be an expert in, transplant medicine.
Yeah. And any kind of person who takes a moment to just pause and reflect on that should see that immediately, right? Yet somehow in our daily kind of goings about life, we fail to hesitate and pause and reflect and say, wait a minute, this guy is an engineer. Why should I take into account what he's saying about vaccines? Or this guy is economists notoriously will comment on climate science, right? Well, we wouldn't take economics advice from a climate scientist. So why are we taking climate science advice from economists?
Why do we? Is it just a deference to authority, or is it that the linguistic tricks that serve a person well in one field, speaking with authority, being able to put together an effective sounding word salad, then translates to the other field?
Yeah. So here's where we can kind of jump into the article. So I think the first thing to understand is what's called epistemic interdependence, right?
It's a big word.
Yeah.
Big
so
words.
let me break that down. So epistemic refers to knowledge, and interdependence just means that we rely on others, right? So in plain language, I just rely on others for knowledge. Now, this kind of runs counter to how a lot of people think, and also how philosophy has traditionally conceived of individuals, right? The traditional view is that, I go through the world and I evaluate the evidence and I come to my, I'm a critical thinker. I come to my own conclusions. But in fact, almost nothing that we know about the world do we discover on our own through trial and error, right? And the reason for that is what's called the costly information hypothesis, right? So when information is costly to acquire through trial and error, we defer to others. And we can understand this just like, let's keep the analogies in the realm of martial arts, right? I want to know how to be a good grappler. Well, through trial and error, I can try to develop my own grappling system.
It can be done, but you're only going to move. Your 10 years of work will take you up to, I don't know, blue belt level.
Yeah. Like it's an extremely time-intensive and costly way of doing things. Like the rational thing for me to do is actually to defer. I should go to somebody who's already a grappling expert, and I should just learn from them, right? And this is where we'll keep the analogy. Like the thing is, like, okay, how do I know who to defer to, right? So we have two and a half different signals that we attend to help us decide who we defer to, right? So the first is what's called the success bias. So we defer to those that we see as successful, okay, that have indicators of success. And so how do I know if someone's good at jiu-jitsu? Well, they win a lot of tournaments, right? Or name your martial art, right? But very often, in like areas where there isn't a clear signal of success, we use what's called the prestige bias, which is a proxy for the success bias. So people who are prestigious, we just make the inference that they must be successful at whatever they're doing.
Can you give an example of in society of somebody who's prestigious but not necessarily successful?
So no, success is good. So success we must relativize to the domain in question, right? So very often people take their health advice from celebrities, right? So celebrities are successful, right? So they're prestigious, but are they successful health practitioners? Right? Have they published a lot of research on nutritional health? They haven't published anything. So here's an area where the prestige bias is a fallible signal of success, and so it screws us up. And like a great example is pre-UFC. Like, why is it that so many people believe like this no-touch knockout stuff in martial arts? Like people believed all sorts, but now like you don't find a lot of people who believe in that stuff, right? Why? Because pre-internet, we didn't have clear success signals for different martial arts. Right? UFC comes on and says, okay, let's actually put these different martial arts up against each other. And now we're going to get a clear signal on which ones actually work and which techniques work. Right? But previously, what was the signal that guided people's patterns of deference? It was prestige.
Their lineage or their claimed lineage. I'm the 32nd descendant of the original Grandmaster of the Shaolin Temple. I've killed 25 people in challenge matches. I've been published in Black Belt Magazine 12 times.
Yeah,
Black Belt Magazine is desperate for
articles. Who's the guy that the kickboxer movie was
Frank Dukes.
About?
Oh, no, you're thinking Bloodsport.
Oh yeah, Bloodsport. Yeah. That's
Frank
right.
Dukes, the American ninja.
Yeah. So it's important to realize that these signals that we attend to for guidance on who to defer to are fallible, right? And so they are proxies, right? So really, what we'd want is we want the success bias, but for a lot of things, like especially if I'm like the average person and I want to know what to believe about astrophysics, right? I don't know who's a successful astrophysicist, like especially if like two astrophysicists are disagreeing. As someone with no knowledge in that field, I don't have the knowledge base to be able to evaluate the claims that each of them are making. So what are my choices? Well, I can look to see which one comes from the most prestigious institution. That's one guide, right? And I can maybe, if I've been to undergrad, I understand something about publication records, right? And I can look to see, okay, who has more publications, right, in peer-reviewed journals. But ultimately, I don't have the knowledge base to be able to evaluate their arguments. And this is exactly what's happening in the anti-vax movement, is you have people with no scientific training that are easily misled by claims from people who are prestigious in their community. But the thing is, these people that are being misled don't have the scientific training to be able to evaluate the quality of those claims.
Yeah. All right. So then the obvious question that the listener or the viewer is going to have is, what gives you and me the right to pontificate on this? I mean, I would say that having a master's of biology, in my case, gives me some background to be able to discern, like go and read the literature sometimes and trying to evaluate two conflicting claims. So that's actually why I've spoken up on this topic, and I'm much more mute about topics I don't understand. Like, I've had guests on the podcast talk about Black Lives Matter, but I feel like an idiot because I don't really know what questions to ask, or I don't follow those arguments as closely. So I don't really, it's not that I don't think that's important, but I don't have the background to really speak on that in an intelligent way.
Good. So, I mean, what you are exhibiting is what's in the fancy language is like epistemic humility, right? So you are recognizing the limits of your expertise, which is super important. It's the first step to not being manipulated and fooled, is to understand, where you have a sufficient knowledge background to even be able to evaluate the plausibility of the claims that people are making, right? So the question is, well, okay, so first of all, I'm not making claims. I'm not claiming to be an expert on vaccines, right? And I don't think you are either, right? What you and I are doing is we are recognizing who the relevant experts are. And the signal that we are looking for is there a consensus among relevant experts, right? Where there is a consensus among relevant experts, the wise person defers to the consensus if they are a non-expert. And so the standard response is this: well, yeah, but experts have been wrong before.
And that's true.
And this is like the binary way of thinking, like as though there's no difference in the probabilities between a consensus of experts being right and some guy on a YouTube video with no credentials spouting off about it, or even if it's a minority, like outlier expert in that field, right? If we just like remove ourselves from the anti-vax situation and we just think like how we live in everyday life, right? If I want to get my taxes done, and I don't know how to do it, I go to an accountant, right? And let's say I go, and my accountant says something to me, and then for whatever reason, I give my taxes to 100 accountants. 85% of the accountants say that you should do it this way. 15% say to do it the other way. What should I do as a reasonable person? Right? They're all experts. Well, I should go with the 85. It's true, the 15 could be right. But what's more probable? Right? It's more probable that 15 people have made a mistake than 85 people have made a mistake.
I think Sam Harris summed this up very well a couple months ago by saying that it's true that all major breakthroughs in science have come from a minority position. Hey, I think the Earth isn't the center of the universe. Hey, I think doctors should wash their hands before they help a woman give birth.
Yeah,
it's true that the major breakthroughs have come from minority positions. But at the same time, the vast majority of minority positions peter out and die and are proven wrong. So if at any one point you have to place a bet, do I go with this one minority position over here? Or do I go with the vast majority? Probably the vast. If I say the only submission you need in jiu-jitsu is the Sankyo wrist lock from Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my position, I'm loud about it, maybe I'm right. The odds are overwhelming that I'm wrong, since all the world champions are doing, arm bars and triangles and leg locks and rear naked chokes and bow and arrow chokes. if you had to in that moment bet, does this one guy, like maybe every 1,000th time I'm going to be right, and the whole sport's going to be replaced with nothing but Sankyo. But the odds of that happening are fairly slim.
Yeah, and I mean this line of reasoning is so common it has a name. It's called the Galileo Gambit. Really? Right? So people will say, aha, well Galileo, he was right and all the experts were wrong. And there's two important things to note about the Galileo Gambit, right? The first is that for every Galileo, there were like thousands of pseudo Galileos who were completely wrong. And so that's like the probabilistic argument, right? The other thing is that what Galileo did that made, first of all, Galileo was not an outsider. He himself was an expert, right? That's one important thing. The other thing is that Galileo explained why the other people held the view that they did. He said, look, I'm going to explain to you your error. And then I'm going to explain to you, so my model explains your error, and it also explains the phenomena that we're observing. And so, I mean, this is the difference, is that, when a consensus changes in science, it's because it comes from inside the field. It rarely ever comes from outside the field, right? B, is that the new model explains the error of the previous model. So it provides evidence for it. And it offers a new interpretation of what we have observed, like the correct one, that offers predictive power and explanatory power.
So people send me a lot of YouTube videos, and it drives me crazy because I wish they would send me an article, because it takes half an hour to watch a half-hour YouTube video, or 15 minutes if you watch it at ×2 speed, and then it takes 2 hours to write a rebuttal, and by that point, a good deal of your day. And I'm sure you've been sent no shortage of YouTube videos, and it's always this doctor, or these 3 doctors, or here are a consortium of 50 doctors who've signed this.
Yeah.
And so there is a problem here, because these people have authority. They supposedly have success. They have achieved some kind of medical degree. They're also popular because they were on Oprah, say. And now they've decided to, speak up and blow the lid off this sham. So there we're being presented with 2 sets of expert opinions. Mm-hmm. Is it as simple as, well, there's always going to be a minority of people and 99.5% of doctors are still saying the same thing? Or how do people discern the claims of, I don't know, Dr. Anthony Fauci with the claims of Dr. Joe Blow, who's got a whole bunch of letters behind his name and a YouTube channel?
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is where we kind of get into the propagandist toolkit, right? So the propagandist understands the prestige bias, right? And they're manipulating the prestige bias. So they know that they need to get someone with some letters behind their name to push their message, right? Because that gives credibility to the message. So the naive general public is like, well, I got one doctor telling me this, another doctor telling me this. I don't know what to believe, right? So what we want to say about this is, first, it's not just expertise that matters. It's relevant expertise. And this requires understanding a little bit how academic disciplines have subdisciplines, right? So for example, in medicine, there's a difference between someone who's an oncologist, a practicing oncologist, and someone who is an immunology, virology researcher, right? They're both medical doctors in a sense, right? But who has the relevant knowledge?
Or not? Isn't Rand Paul, isn't he an optometrist or something?
Yeah, the guy's an eye doctor, right? So why would we ask? I would never ask a virologist for advice about my eyes. So why am I asking an eye doctor for advice about viruses? Right? So it's true they're both doctors and they have some kind of background knowledge. right? Or some baseline level of knowledge, but they don't have expertise, right? And it's expertise that matters. And so when we look at a consensus, right, when we're looking for that signal, we want a consensus of relevant experts, right? Not just experts broadly construed. And that's what the propagandist does. So I'm sure you've been emailed the Great Barrington Declaration, right?
Yes.
And so there's a couple, people with some letters on their names, but by and large, these are not relevant experts.
Can you just quickly explain what the Great Barrington Declaration is? Because I think a lot of people have been exposed to this without knowing the name of it.
Yeah, so the Barrington Declaration, I think, was put together by 3, I want to say doctors, some people with medical credentials. And they wanted to say that the lockdowns are not working, or the pandemic is not as severe as people say it is. And then they opened it up for other signatories. And the thing is, there were no restrictions on who could sign it, right? So I think like someone signed it, like Spider-Man. There's like a Hulk Hogan on there, and like naturopaths and chiropractors, people who have no relevant training in disease pathology, in immunology, in population health. So again, this is the question of relevant experts. And even if there were some relevant experts in there, the number of relevant experts in the Great Barrington Declaration compared to every major health agency in the entire world, clearly the balance falls, the weight falls on one side. And also there's a great paper that came out, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, on the mathematical probabilities of conspiracy theories. And it gives like this geometric understanding of the plausibility, how plausibility and the size of a conspiracy are interrelated. So basically, any conspiracy, so they looked at real conspiracies to get like their data set. And then they looked, as a conspiracy gets bigger, the less and less plausible it becomes, because more and more people need to be involved and somehow paid off and also keep it quiet.
Yeah, you and I could have a legitimate conspiracy to, I don't know, rob a bank.
Yeah,
that's entirely plausible.
This is like the great. This is like a classical line of evidence that conspiracy theorists will use. Like, well, are you saying that there's no such thing as conspiracies, that they never happen? Yeah, they do happen, but you know what? We discover them because of evidence, right? And you can't make the inference from the fact that there was a conspiracy theory in this other domain with these other actors, that therefore like everything else is a conspiracy. No, the reason why that we said that this was a conspiracy is because there was evidence supporting the fact that it was a conspiracy. And so the plausibility that the public health scientists and immunologists in every major national health agency in the entire world are in on some conspiracy, or either that or misunderstand the data, while some other YouTuber does, is just so implausible that nobody should take it seriously.
I'm glad you used the word implausible as opposed to standard academic phrasing, which is like, the probability of this approaches 0. That's because that's part of the problem. I'll put it in simpler language. It's fucking impossible. Like, you're not going to have the CDC and, South Korea and Finland and Switzerland and Canada and Australia all, marching in lockstep. And China to some extent. I mean, yeah. I'm not saying that China is legit, but I mean, I'm not saying that China doesn't lie.
All these people got together,
yeah.
Yeah.
What other tools are in the propagandist toolkit, and how are they manifesting themselves in today's world?
So repeat that one more time.
What other tools are in the propagandist toolkit, and how are they being deployed? And related to some, if we relate everything to a YouTube video link that you've been sent, we could probably do fairly well.
Yeah. So a classical strategy is so here's the thing about propaganda, especially sophisticated propaganda, is it doesn't use false claims, right? It just frames true things in a way that are misleading, right? And this is what makes them frustrating. So like the classical way that they do this is to use what I call the fallacy of confirming instances or hasty generalization. So what they'll do is they'll say, let's say, actually I predicted this, like as soon as the vaccines rolled out, I said, guaranteed, as soon as somebody dies after getting a vaccine, all the anti-vax sites are going to be like, somebody died from the vaccine, right? So this is the error of failing to contextualize the information. Like, even if it's true, let's just suppose that some small number of people die from the vaccine. Even if that is true, we need to compare it to the risk of not getting vaccinated. So risk is never absolute. It's always relative. So we have to say, what is the relative risk? So the risk, let's say the risk of the vaccine, of dying from the vaccine is 1 in 500,000. Okay. Well, we have to always ask, compared to what? Compared to not getting the vaccine. And in a pandemic, that means getting COVID-19, right? And what is the risk of getting COVID-19? So what are the risks associated with getting COVID-19? Well, 20% hospitalization rate. Of the hospitalized, 1 in 5 have long-term conditions. And was it 1 in, depending on your rate, but let's say 1 in 1,000 die. Okay, so if you're concerned about 1 in 500,000 people dying, if that's a concerning risk for you, then by your own reasoning, you should be even more concerned about COVID-19, which is a 1 in 1,000 risk of dying, right? Or let's say it's 1 in 10,000. It's still less. But if you are like this upset about a 1 in 5,000 risk of dying, then you should be like absolutely going crazy about the risk of COVID-19, which is orders of magnitude greater.
Yeah. Where would what kind of argument is being used when people say, look, I don't know, Pfizer got found criminally negligent in this lawsuit here, or the Johnson & Johnson family is corrupt. I mean, to me, it's a little bit like saying you can't trust a cop because here's a news story of this cop who was a legitimate, completely corrupt cop in a different part of the city. Like, yes, but I mean, that seems like a pretty standard playbook.
Yeah. So the name for that, because again, it's such a common method of reasoning that we see. It's called poisoning the well. You've probably heard of that, right? Now, the most important thing that a propagandist does is it manipulates trust, because we know that people defer for information to people that they trust and sources that they trust, and they reject information from sources that they distrust. And so in order for the propagandists to do their work, they must make you distrust the legitimate sources and trust their sources. And so that's why the propagandist has a twofold strategy. They will always try to find people with letters after their name to push their message, because that will inspire you to trust them, right? But they also need the parallel strategy of making you distrust the legitimate sources. And here's like a really fascinating study that came out in 2020, where they employed like these Bayesian computer models to see like how trust affects whether a community polarizes on beliefs, meaning one believes it, one doesn't, or whether they reach a consensus on a belief. They all converge on the same belief. And so what happens is, if you make some people in the community distrust a source, what happens is the same evidence, the people that distrust the source will reject that evidence, and they'll believe the opposite of what that evidence suggests. And then the other group goes the other way. And so this creates a problem, because the groups that are converging on the wrong belief, they because of their trust relations, they will reject the evidence that will help change their belief. Not only that, but that evidence pushes them even further in the wrong direction.
They've been effectively inoculated against it. If they're anti-vaccine activists, they've been inoculated against the truth and the evidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then how do you deal with this? I mean, sometimes I think, man, people, partially the fault of the education system and partially that we're just such terrible assessors of risk. You know, some dude is super worried about a 1 in a million chance of the AstraZeneca vaccine giving him a blood clot, but he goes out, drives drunk, doesn't put on sunscreen. I mean, the odds of you dying from not putting on sunscreen are infinitely higher than the odds of dying from the AstraZeneca, at least with current knowledge. That people just don't really think in terms of statistics. They don't think in terms of numbers. They don't think in terms of data. They think in terms of stories and personal experience. I mean, if somebody in their church group, the effect of having a single 30-year-old healthy parishioner die in their church group from COVID is going to swing more of that group towards vaccination than any amount of data or proof or public health messaging that it could possibly be thrown there. Is it all? Are we just going to have to wait for people to die in everyone's social circle, or is there a way? Well, first, let's talk about that. The power of personal experience as opposed to like received information.
Yeah. So this goes back to like hasty generalizations, right? I mean, really, appeal to anecdotes is a form of a hasty generalization. You're taking a single data point and you're generalizing from that data point beyond what a single data point can tell you, or even like a small data point, right? So often, like what I talk about is what's called the total evidence requirement, right? So we need to ask the question, what is the total evidence I would need to make in order to make a decision on this, right? So knowing how many people died in my church doesn't meet the standard for total evidence requirement, right? I need to know how many people, it's confined to the US, like how many people in the US died from COVID compared to how many people died from getting the vaccine. Now I can compare, right? But when I just say, oh, this many people died from, or this many people had side effects from the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. But those are still numbers coming from the outside world, probably from people who are lying to you.
Yeah.
Whereas the experience of watching...
Well, I mean, this, again, remember, it doesn't have to, for good propaganda, they don't have to lie. They just have to decontextualize the information or present it in the wrong context, right? So they can tell you exactly how many people had side effects. Like you probably saw this, like people posting all like the stuff from the VARS symptom, that it's the passive vaccine side effect.
Vaccine adverse reaction database.
Yeah. So you've seen the anti-vaxxers posting those lists, right? But so none of that is false, right? But that information isn't properly contextualized.
Well, some of it's false because one researcher famously, one doctor famously entered that a side effect of some vaccine was that he turned into the Incredible Hulk.
That's right. Yeah.
Showing that there's actually it's designed to be a very broad monitoring system with a very low barrier to entry because they don't want to miss anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I mean, so that's part of contextualizing, right? So when those anti-vaxxers post that, right, there's no context given to like what the purpose of that information is, or like what the standard of evidence is, whether you can infer causation from that, let alone, comparing, like situating it in like relative risk where we can make proper risk assessments, right? So again, so it's true, like we can say, technically it's true, people did report those things, right? But given no more context, that can like be very alarming, right? But when you frame it in its proper context and you understand what that system is, and also like compare it to the group that didn't get vaccinated, right? What are their statistics looking like?
So there's this axiom, I suppose, or principle, Brandolini's principle of bullshit, that it takes 10 times more effort to refute a lie or to refute bullshit than it does to create it. Is this actually true? Like, does this actually happen?
I don't know of any actual empirical studies, but it would not shock me. Like when I write my debunking articles, I have to go and actually verify everything I'm saying. I have to look up what they're saying, what are the sources. I got to think through it. Like, what's the problem? Whereas, like, they're not constrained by truth, so they can just say whatever they want to say, and so there's no need to do research, right? And there's no need to think about proper contextualization of the information that they're saying, because they already know how they want it to come out. And so then, like, just for those reasons, it's going to be much easier just to, put bullshit out there. I think, it takes at least twice as much time.
I think another tool that I've seen used, and I'm betting it's part of the toolkit, is the Gish Gallop. Now, I once saw Duane Gish, who was a famous so-called scientific creationist. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, scientific creationism was an attempt to Trojan horse the Bible story into the educational system, and to undermine traditional biology. And I freaked out about the non-teaching of evolution in high school, because without the concept of evolution, most of biology doesn't make sense. It's like trying to teach civil engineering without being allowed to mention the word gravity. You need, because things don't make sense and without Darwinian selection, basically. That's right. And so I watched this debate between a very good professor of evolutionary biology, Graham Bell at McGill University, and Duane Gish. Mm-hmm. And the problem was that Dr. Bell was an expert in evolutionary biology, and Duane Gish was an expert in debating professors of evolutionary biology. And the Gish Gallop, where he would just go fact after fact after fact after fact after fact after fact after fact, or what appeared to be fact after fact after fact. And it was really out of context thing one, straight up distortion thing two, lie number three, another out of context thing. 30 comments later, he'd used up his time, and now Graham Bell would start working on point one. Yep. And then he'd finish halfway through point two, and then his time was up. So there's still like 28 accusations that have been unanswered. And I see this a fair bit, like sort of Gish Gallops. Yeah. I know they're Gish Gallops, but a Gish Gallop sounds better.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there's two things I'd want to say about that. The first is like how to handle it, right? When you're subject to it.
Please.
What I do is I tell the person, I ask the person, what for you is the most compelling claim of all of these that have been made, that this person has said, and the one that, if it turned out to be false, would make you less sure of what he's claiming, what his main claim is. It's a losing battle to try to address everything. You're just going to drive yourself crazy. So I try to get the person to commit to the thing that they think is the most compelling. And I'm only going to focus on that. And I'm not going to, all this like, yeah, but. No. Let's just, you tell me what is the most compelling thing for you. And then I'm going to focus my attention on that. But also with the caveat that if it turns out that this is false or misleading, that for you, that would be evidence that maybe the position isn't as secure as you thought. So that's when I'm dealing one-on-one with people, that's how I do it.
Mm. Yeah, the problem there is, and I don't have the source for this, is I believe there was some research done by sort of a think tank, and they were doing randomized controlled studies of taking Ami, and saying, what is your single biggest problem with, say, vaccination? And then if I addressed it, then they'd try to, they'd have 100 Amis, they'd try to address 10 of them with data to refute the biggest problem, and then they'd hit it from other angles. And actually addressing the concern was often not as effective as addressing other concerns that they didn't say. Basically, people aren't being honest about what their real biggest concern is, or they're being particularly resistant to any data that would undermine their biggest concern. And the most effective way to get through to them is actually coming at them from the side with another.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that study. I mean, yeah, so my approach, I mean, maybe the study undermines my approach, but
have you successfully turned
I think
people around?
like I want them to tell me what they think is the most compelling, right? Evidence or argument. Now, the other thing I would say is that it's important that we distinguish between people who are vaccine hesitant and people who are vaccine refusers.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm part of this group on Facebook, which is like a mix of like academics and medical people who work in the medical field, and people who want to get vaccinated. Like they understand that it's a good thing, but they have a lot of reservations. These people are sincere. And so what they do is they'll post what their reservations are and their fears, and they'll say, can anybody help me reduce my anxiety? Like, these people are genuine, they're sincere. The vaccine hesitant are responsive to evidence and reason.
Okay.
Because they don't want to be afraid of the vaccine. Like, it would be much better for them, because imagine, like, they're torn between, because these are reasonable people. They don't dismiss COVID-19, but they're afraid of the vaccine. They want to be able to take the vaccine and that way they can eliminate the concerns about COVID-19. But we live in this information environment that's just like full of garbage information about vaccines, and they've been subjected to it, right? So when I engage with someone, I'm thinking, is this a vaccine hesitant person, or is this a vaccine refuser, or is, in more broadly, is this someone who's like just kind of curious about this, or they're not sure what to believe, or is this a conspiracist, like a hardcore conspiracist? And really what they're trying to do is kind of get me to change my mind, right? Now, the vaccine refusers and the like hardcore conspiracists, that belief that vaccines are bad isn't like a peripheral belief for them. It's part of their identity. And it's what allows them membership in a particular community and all the kinds of fruitful relationships that come from being part of that community. And so for them, asking them to change that belief means asking them to leave their community. It's like asking someone to leave their religion, right? It's a big ask. And so I don't try to change the minds of vaccine refusers, but it doesn't mean I don't engage with them. So there are reasons to engage with vaccine refusers. It just depends on how patient and how much time you have, right? Because this is the great thing about social media, is it's not just the person you're engaged with in the comments thread. It's the other people who are reading it. So sometimes I will engage with a vaccine refuser and I'll ask them the question, like, what is the most compelling argument? And then I'll show how that argument doesn't work or that evidence is false. Now, they're not going to change their mind, but that's okay. That's not my goal. My goal is the vaccine hesitant person reading it who sees how reasonable I am and how I can produce the evidence to support my view. And this other person just keeps on moving the goalposts.
That was my approach for the longest time, back when we were arguing about, is COVID real? Do masks work? What is the true infection fatality rate? Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just me having lost patience, or my strategy now, if this is a genuine question, I'll genuinely take a ton of time to answer it. But if I get the sense that it's a hardcore anti-vax evangelist, I'll just ban them. And because I think I'm giving them oxygen. I think they're using my fairly large social media platform to actively spread disinformation. And so I'm torn between actively trying to engage them in good faith, knowing that it probably won't be a good faith exchange, and speaking to the people on the sidelines, versus screw you, I'm not going to provide you with a platform to keep on spreading your lives. And I don't know what the right balance is there. I've moved much more towards the just, get that, get thee gone and bother me no more.
I think what you're going through is what a lot of people, including myself, are going through, is just fatigue from dealing with just the constant fire hose of bullshit. And so I think like it depends on the social media platform too. So on Twitter, like you can't control who's following you, really. Like anyone could follow you, but you have to actively block them. Versus Facebook, where I have more control over curating, who my friends are. So like in a Twitter environment, yeah, you're giving oxygen to those beliefs in a sense if you leave them unaddressed.
I'll say YouTube has been the worst.
Yeah, I don't engage.
Anonymous. It's just an email address. Like a troll doesn't even have to create a profile. I mean, I am very anti-conspiracy. Yet the one conspiracy I think that could be true is that a significant number of the people that I'm interacting with are trolls and bots from St. Petersburg or from Beijing, and it's just trying to, why invade a country when you can get that country to tear itself apart? I am cognizant that I might not be interacting with real people.
Yeah, I mean, there are studies on bots and show that a significant portion of anti-vax postings are coming from Russian bots.
Do you know how they know that? Because I've heard that as well.
Yeah, I'd have to dig up the study. Well, there's a way that they can identify whether something's a bot. They have some algorithm to identify whether something's a bot. And then they look at the content that the bot spits out.
There was a fairly fairly well-known incident a few years ago. I might get the details wrong, but I think it was at the House Intelligence Committee in the United States, where a general presented the case that, the Texans Against Sharia Law Facebook group, with a big Facebook group, we hate Sharia law, let's have a demonstration to stop Texas from adopting Sharia law, and let's meet at the corner of, 8th Avenue and Cactus Street on Saturday at noon. Yeah. Meanwhile, there was another Facebook group, the Preservation for Islamic Knowledge. Yeah. And let's have a demonstration to preserve Islamic knowledge on Saturday at 8th and Cactus Street. And I'm making up the street names, I'm making up the date. But when that guy was asked, how much did this, and it was both organizations were tracked to a troll farm in St. Petersburg, apparently. And I'm going here with what I read in the media. So this isn't
I heard the same report.
And it was $200 to create this potentially, you might potentially have in Texas, you might well have a shootout between the armed Islamic knowledge people and the armed Texans Against Sharia law people if they show up at the same place, same time.
Yeah, I think there was more than one incident like that it was orchestrated. And I know other studies have come out showing that African American communities were targeted with social media groups like this during the 2016 election. So yeah, this is Facebook has implemented some strategies to try to cut down on this, but people always find workarounds. But yeah, this is a real problem.
What are some other tools in the propagandist toolkit that we might be dealing with? Are there any major ones that we've left out?
Let's see. We've talked about bringing distrust. So promoting distrust in legitimate experts. Promoting pseudo experts either individually or coming up with these lists of scientists that deny this. So they did it for climate change. They did it for the Great Barrington thing for lockdowns. They've done it for GMOs. Those are the big ones.
Anti-vaccine as well.
Yeah, anti-vaccine. I'm trying to think what. I mean, the other kind of big strategies is just how they contextualize information, right? So, like I said, the big thing is they will say things that are not false, but just contextualize in a way that are very misleading, and any naive person coming in contact with it will infer the wrong thing.
Okay. So, given all this stuff, which is kind of doom and gloomish, how do you see this playing out? I mean, when do you think you'll start teaching judo again at your university?
Oh boy. Yeah, I've been wondering about that, because for me, like, the window on being able to do judo physically is closing. I'm sure, as you know, like, judo is just really brutal on the body.
I've done way more jiu-jitsu than judo, and almost all of my injuries have come from judo, which I've spent a much smaller amount of time doing. So
yeah, just the constant impact. I mean, when you're young, you can take it, but I'll be 47 next month, and you accumulate neck injuries, shoulder injuries, just taking those falls.
You'll become like those old guys in Japan who only do newaza, who only do the ground stuff and never do any of the throwing.
Yeah, I think, like, my plan, I think, is I think I'm going to continue to teach judo, but I'm going to switch over to jiu-jitsu for my own training, just because I don't know how much more impact my body can take, especially getting thrown by white belts, which is the absolute worst.
But, I mean, right now, is your judo club open?
No, judo club's closed, and like, my sensei's dojo also closed. So I was, training under Frances Glaze, who's a 7th Dan judoka in Ohio, and she had to close her dojo down. So yeah, it's sad times for martial arts community.
So if you had to predict, again, asking to be Nostradamus, when do you think in your neck of the woods that the martial arts community will be back to normal?
I would say the fall semester.
Okay. So after this good penetration of the vaccines and the...
Yeah, I think by the fall semester, everybody who wanted the vaccine will have had it. And then college campuses... Now, this is the tricky thing. College campuses are going to try to make it mandatory to have the vaccine to attend classes. And they've done that with other vaccines, right? You have to have your MMR vaccine, I think, to be on for most colleges. And there might be one other one, I can't remember. The problem is this, is that currently the vaccine is approved under emergency use. And under emergency use, you cannot mandate that everyone have the vaccine. It has to be voluntary, right? So, and then just a little bit technical vaccine policy. There's a difference between compulsory vaccination and mandatory vaccination.
Oh.
Yeah. So compulsory is like, I'm going to come and I'm going to vaccinate you, right? And this is very rarely used, but it has been used, right? So, for example, there was an outbreak in a church, I believe it was in Philadelphia in the early 90s, that was an anti-vax church. And there was a measles outbreak within the church, and kids started to die. And also the measles started to go to the outside community, because these people aren't like in some sealed area. They're interacting with regular people. Super transmissible.
It's like the most transmissible of the virus.
Yeah, the most transmissible. So the court the court made it compulsory that the children be vaccinated against the parents' wishes, right? So that's compulsory vaccination, right? Mandatory vaccination is if you want access to certain services, you have to be vaccinated. So this is often used for public education, right? If you want to attend public schools, you have to have your kid has to have these vaccinations. We're not going to force you to get vaccinated, but we're just going to deprive you of access to certain public services and goods. So I think what colleges want to do is to have mandatory vaccines, meaning if you want to come on campus and have in-person classes, you have to have the vaccine. You can attend online classes. We're not going to stop you, right, without the vaccine. But if you want to be on campus, you have to have the vaccine.
Well, on the front of, on the depressing news front, there's a school maybe 3 hours drive from where I live that recently made it, did reverse mandatory vaccination. You cannot train there if you have been vaccinated due to health reasons.
Wait,
this is real. This made international news. And I think
this Vancouver?
No, this is in Kelowna.
Oh.
It's a fucking school that basically ripped its entire branding and marketing and name off of some school in Malaysia. Like if you look at the two websites, the Malaysian one came first, and they basically, hey, that's a good logo. We'll put it on ours. Hey, that's a good name. We'll steal that. It's run by a meditation coach, which is really the only profession that makes life coach look respectable. And yeah, they legit. I have a screen capture. It's not fake. They're in consultation with medical professionals, they've decided that it's too dangerous to let people who've been vaccinated train at the place, and their insurance, it's too much of a liability hazard. Now, it's masterful trolling. It's a play for attention. It's a statement against vaccine passports. I understand that it's all these things, but man, if that's a sign of things to come, the level of polarization around this has just begun. Like if Jim Bob's fish and chips and ammo store, starts requiring proof that you haven't been vaccinated, I don't know how they would do that, but then I think the culture wars we've seen so far, and that kind of stuff's going to happen in response to universities mandating that. And so I hope this thing doesn't have legs. I really hope so.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is that there's some evidence that shows that mandatory vaccine policy increases vaccine compliance, right? Because you just make it really inconvenient for people not to have their vaccines. Because a lot of people, this is the thing. Like I said, there's a difference between vaccine refusers and vaccine hesitants, right? And then there's in between, right? So if you make it really inconvenient not to be vaccinated, people are just going to be like, this is too inconvenient. I'm just going to go do it. Unless they're hardcore, right? The hardcore, different studies, give different statistics on how big that is, and it varies from state to state. But the real problem is, let's say you have like measles vaccine, for example, you need 93% compliance in order for there to be herd immunity, right? So people would say, oh yeah, well, 6% of the population isn't vaccinated. We're at 94%. It's all good. This ignores homophily, which is like the tendency for like to attract like. And so people who are anti-vaccine are going to tend to congregate in the same communities and same areas. And so you'll have like districts or school districts that are like 40% unvaccinated.
Like has happened with the measles outbreaks in, Oregon and California.
Yeah.
But,
you get clustering. Yeah.
This is our little hippie village in the mountains, or, we put amethyst crystals all around the border of our neighborhood, and therefore we're safe from evil spirits and stuff. But, I'm sure similar things were done in the Middle Ages for the Black Plague.
Yeah. Oh, very quickly, going back to your question about training, I've heard some dojos do like training pods, which seems to me a reasonable compromise.
I'm hearing more about it, and I mean, I think it's actually quite a reasonable business strategy. Like if 90% if 90% of schools in your area are functionally COVID denialists, right? Hey, we come and train. Don't worry, we're using, I don't know, we're doing kabuki disinfection. Like we're cleaning all the door handles once a day, ignoring the fact that this is transmitted by aerosols. Yeah. Then the 10% of clubs that are saying we've got we have a requirement for vaccination, and we're going to still keep you in training pods, and you're going to be training in pods of 4 or 5 people. I think it creates a real business opportunity for these people who are sitting on the fence going, what the hell's happened to my community? Wait a second. These guys seem to be taking it seriously and doing the right thing, and I've been vaccinated. I don't want to train with those guys. I think you could, I don't think it'd be a viable strategy for every school to do that, but I think it's a huge opportunity for some schools to siphon off and reactivate people who essentially become inactive over the last year. So I hope more people do it. I think it's a great potential untapped business opportunity.
Yeah, all you dojo owners out there, listen up.
Well, what do you think would happen when you say you start teaching in the fall, and let's say the situation's better, but it's still not perfect, and let's say your university has a mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated people, because you're moving to Texas soon, right?
Yeah, I'm moving May 31st.
I'm going to go out there and guess that if the university imposes a mandatory vaccination policy, that the state government would get involved and it'll turn into a giant battle. So let's assume that you've got, what would happen functionally if you said, okay, we're going to have 3 training pods, you know, the unvaccinated train on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the vaccinated train the rest of the week in training pods. Would that fly at the university level, or would holy hell descend upon you from admin who's now going to be dealing with a legal fight with the state government?
I think if I were running it on campus, they would probably require vaccinations, even though legally they can't. I'm not required to accept everybody into my club. I can't discriminate based on race, gender, sexuality, and stuff, or viewpoint. But I can discriminate based on vaccination status. There's nothing in the rules that says I can't.
Yeah,
so I think I could. Yeah,
it'll be really, really interesting, and I mean, I'm just trying to stick to the science of it, and then let public policy be a whole separate fight that I don't want to get. There's enough battling with, you know, mRNA vaccines not changing DNA for me not to weigh in upon public health policy, even though arguably public health policy is incredibly important.
I've said numerous times, you know, throughout this pandemic, I am so glad that I'm not the person in charge of deciding whether school's open or not, because there is no decision that you can make that's not going to piss off a significant group of people. So I think, like, you know, the general public needs to be more sympathetic to the people who are making decisions and understand that there are competing interests and values, and not everyone's going to get everything they want.
Well, welcome to living in a society. I mean, I can't drive as fast as I want on the streets because my right to drive as fast as I want to ends when I mow down a mother and child who are on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is an important, actually, this is an important point that often anti-vaxxers will miss, and this is what I like to do is examine their arguments and show that by their own argument, actually a different conclusion follows. So what they'll say is that, you know, you cannot force me to be subjected to the risk of the vaccine, right? And sure, like, principle of autonomy in medical ethics, it's true. I can't take a healthy individual and subject them to a risk without their informed consent. True. But that works both ways. If you're unvaccinated, then you are subjecting other people to risk without their informed consent. And so by your own reasoning, you can't go to a school where people are vaccinated if you're unvaccinated.
Okay. Well, on that, I think discussing the sort of propagandist toolkit and helping people recognize when it's being used and helping people try and figure out the relative value of 2 different expert opinions has been incredibly helpful to a significant number of people. If people want to read more stuff by you or follow you on social media, what do they do?
Yeah, so I have my blog, wrestlingwithphilosophy.com. I think it's wrestling-with-philosophy.com. And then I just started a podcast. We're just putting it up now. It's called Philosophy for the Vulgar. And vulgar in this context is the old meaning of vulgar, which just means like regular people. So it's a friend of mine and myself. We just take important readings that you would encounter in like a 101 type philosophy class, and we just kind of walk you through it and discuss some of the key issues and try to apply them to our contemporary context. So that's philosophyforthevulgar.com. We're just putting it up over the weekend. And then on Twitter, you can follow me at philosophersbelike. No, wait. Philosophami at philosophersbelike.
It's Philosophami where I found you.
Yeah, Philosophami with PHs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Amy. Good luck with your teaching and your writing and your other teaching and your training. And stop getting thrown and come down to the ground.
Thank you. I appreciate all you do for the community. It's really helpful.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.